Well, our science editor, Tom Clarke, has been looking at how the energy market in the United States is being transformed as we speak, following the introduction of fracking, and what that could mean for Britain.
Fracking was once an expensive and marginal way of getting gas out of the ground. But as conventional reserves run out, it's led to a world-changing shift in energy production. And it's America which has been at the forefront of this new dash for gas, released by fracking. In just 5 years, it's gone from a significant importer of gas to being almost self-sufficient. These vast areas show the unconventional reserves in the US, gas trapped in rocks and shales that fracking can release. In 1990, less than 10% of America's gas was coming from these sources. By 2010, more than half was from that hard-to-reach gas. And the US government estimates that by 2035, 70% or more will come from fracking.
Big impact on the American gas market. Prices there have plummeted over the last half-decade or so, primarily as a result of hydraulic fracturing and shale gas. That spurred a revival of some heavy industry, chemicals and the like.
Given the success of fracking in the US, soon we could be fracking all over the world. There are huge reserves in South America, Australia, China, close to home, Poland, all of which are beginning to exploit their reserves. Britain has shale gas reserves of 5 trillion cubic feet, equivalent to a year and a half of our total consumption, but they could be 10 times that under the North Sea. But fracking gas from the outskirts of Blackpool ain't the same as the prairies of the US.
In the US context, there's lots of effectively empty spaces. Population density is a tenth of the British situation. And in that context, I think it's been very much more difficult to exploit shale economically. That doesn't mean we won't be able to get some, but we shouldn't expect it to be anything like the game changer that we've seen in the US.
It's not just crowded here. The UK also has legally binding targets on greenhouse gases. Those should favour renewable energy sources like wind power over carbon-intensive shale gas. So even if the Department of Energy lifts their moratorium on shale gas, ultimately it's businesses that will decide whether fracking in Britain is cost-effective or not.
So it's slashed gas prices in the United States. Surely we won't be far behind in welcoming it with open arms. With me now, the environmentalist Tony Juniper, and in Calgary, Canada, Richard Moorman, head of Tamboran Resources, a fracking company with sites in Australia and Botswana, but more importantly, a licence to operate in Northern Ireland. Let's just check first, Mr. Moorman, when you hope to bring gas up out of the shale and into production in Northern Ireland.
Well, good afternoon. I think the earliest that we can reasonably expect to be bringing gas to surface in Northern Ireland will be in late 2013 or early 2014. The company first has to conduct a series of environmental impact assessments to ensure that the project can be done safely with minimal impact to the local communities, and then secondly, to allow for public consultation.
But this report today kind of gives you the go-ahead, doesn't it, in a kind of global sense?
Well, I think we have to be careful what the report does say. It's encouraging that the report says that seismic effects can be prevented and controlled through effective regulation and the effective use of advanced technologies. This is not a freebie. The company has to do what it has to do. However, it really only covers off part of what we have to do when we consider shale projects. Shale projects have a significant impact compared to conventional projects. We drill more wells in a given area. And so the onus falls again on the operator to make sure that they reduce or completely minimize that impact. Right. This report's encouraging, but it's only a start.
Here's a very well-behaved company by the sound of it, Tony Juniper. And surely the problem for any environmentalist is if gas prices plummet as a result of bringing this stuff up, it's not going to be stopped, is it?
I think we need to be cautious about comparing the situation here with the United States, and there's various reports out there, including one from Deutsche Bank, which tells us that we shouldn't expect gas prices to plummet as they have over there for all sorts of reasons, including those mentioned just now. This is a very crowded country. The environmental issues will be much more pronounced, and therefore it will be more expensive to get the gas out of the ground. The thing that really worries me, however, is not so much the seismic impact geologically, it's the seismic impact of this stuff on the global climatic situation. And the idea of us opening up a whole new family of fossil fuel resources at a time when we need to be cutting our emissions very aggressively, I think is something that is the biggest concern of all here.
Well, that's a big challenge, isn't it, Mr. Moorman? Because the truth of the matter is this is another dirty energy.
Well, hydrocarbon fuels are what they are. The reality is the United Kingdom burns a tremendous amount of hydrocarbon fuels, and so shale gas is a means to get the country less dependent on imports. One thing people don't consider is that those imports come from a great distance. Liquefied natural gas cargoes that come from Qatar, for example, burn over 10% of their product just to power the vessels to get to the United Kingdom. So a tremendous amount of emissions are lost in importing as well. However, the gas
let me just pause you on that. Let me just
than coal in the majority of studies.
Let me just pause you on that, because that's a rather important point. I mean, if in fact you're cutting global emissions by reducing the amount of burn to get the wretched stuff, that is a plus, isn't it?
Well, this is not like conventional gas. It's got other emissions linked to it, which actually put it in the same.
Its transport. If in
well,
fact
that's one factor, but then again, count against that the amount of energy needed to get this stuff out of the ground, plus also the fugitive emissions of methane that come from this process, which are higher than conventional gas production, and those methane emissions are 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide. And if you start adding up all of those impacts, then this doesn't look so clean. I think if the British government is going to progress with this kind of industry, we need to have a very clear policy laid out that's going to tell us how we're going to do that at the same time as decarbonising our electricity sector, which is basically what the government is being told by its official advisors. One
of the things, Richard Moorman, that this report doesn't talk about is groundwater. And you say you're going to be taking sort of serious environmental tests and the rest of it. But can you ever really be sure that you won't be polluting groundwater deep down that comes up and really does pollute what people are consuming?
Well, it's a fair question, and it's a fair concern for people who are new to the process. The reality is there are a couple of things that have to be done, can be done, and are readily checked. First of all, the wellbores have to be constructed thoroughly. This is easily checked with modern tools and easily managed by regulatory authorities that are keen to show they're serious to protect the public. So that's the first step, is make sure that groundwater cannot be contaminated directly by drilling the well. Secondly, to your very point about deep fluids, this comes back to the practices again of how do you handle fluids that return to surface. In Tamboran's case, we have a 4-piece containment system: a tank, a cement layer, an impenetrable membrane, and a dike system around the entire lease. However, I can't speak that way for every operator. Right. Nonetheless, I think if the government regulates such things, that it will prevent any problems.
Richard Moorman, head of Tamboran Resources, thank you very much. And I'm sorry his picture was a little fuzzy, but his words were very clear. Thank you very much indeed. And Tony Juniper, thank you also for coming in. Now,